Dumelang, Sanbonani. I'd just like to acknowledge the Dean and of course all the academic staff, the various heads of departments and so forth. I'm coming from an academic environment myself. I used to be an academic, and I know academics don't like protocol. If they can dress down most of the time and wear a t-shirt to work and so forth, they will love it, because I mean that's the nature of academic freedom. You are in a much more relaxed environment, even though there's a lot of work to be done. Now I'm very excited to actually honor this invitation. It's a pleasure it's been a pleasure to watch this university grow over the past 10 or so years that it has been in existence, from the various components that it came from. And I've noted that you have had very high-profile speakers, from the president, former president, and so forth, coming to address you on various issues. And of course, it shows that the leadership of this university is, on top of things. You are really the future. You are the leaders of tomorrow. You are the owners of South Africa. You are the owners of Africa. You're owners of the world. Because this is a multinational institution, very large in stature and able to grow what we have, and it has also got the capacity to destroy it. What happens when you leave here, it will determine what the future of this country has in store. And so I think what I can see, even as a former academic myself, I very often, whether it's an airport or it's a shopping center, the other side of the world, I encounter my former students doing wonderful things. And I also encounter some of them doing terrible things, But for the most part, they're doing wonderful things. They are changing society as we know it. Some of them are lawyers. Some of them obviously were BCom students. Some of them were economic sciences students, like as most of you here are, because they had a compulsory commercial law component that I had to teach. And what I can say is, what you take from these years as a university student or as a college student will settle with you for the rest of your life. And very often the mistakes that you make while here on campus will follow you for the rest of your life. Those bad grades that you get very often stop you from getting scholarships that enhance your studies further. So I think this is the golden moment, the golden chance that you have to grow as a human being. And I think I would say that this is the perfect timing for people to actually seize it with both hands. Now, to today's presentation, I was asked to speak about what we do as the Office of the Public Protector and link it to the real world that you are going to, the real world that I have just alluded to, that, most of you, I think, are in your first, second, or third year, or whichever year you are in, and you're going to the world of work, and how it will affect you as you go ahead. And of course, this covers 4 particular themes that are critical. Firstly, that is the role of the public protector as an institution and the person. And of course, here we're looking at our role within the issue, within the context of the national integrity framework. What is governance? What do we mean by good governance? You have seen in media reports that on Monday and Tuesday this week, we hosted our 4th annual National Good Governance Conference in Pretoria, where we had the National Minister of Planning, Trevor Manuel, Minister of Justice, Jeff Hadebe, archbishops, Gundungane, and all these people from various sectors coming to address us on what is it that we mean by good governance. And we are an institution that is there to promote that. But then, for what you do, I will also emphasize the issue of consequences of corruption and maladministration in the public sector, and of course, how to deal with corruption and maladministration in the public sector. So now, then the question is, people obviously have seen Advocate Thuli Madonsela, and those who are older will have known of advocates Lawrence Mushwana, advocates Mamiki Shai, the former Deputy Public Protector, advocates Selby Barkwa, now Judge Barkwa, all of whom have served the role of Public Protector and Deputy Public Protector of the Republic at some point. Why the need for this institution? Now, there's a quote from former President Nelson Mandela, which is not on the slide, that I want to highlight, where he said, and this was at the launch of the institution of the Public Protector in 1996, thereabout, where he said, we cannot leave governance to the whims of society or individual leaders, no matter how good those leaders are. We need an institution that is the conscience of the state. Because when someone says your conscience, maybe this is a class setup. What do they mean when they say your conscience should tell you? Anyone wants to take a chance? Your conscience. If someone says your conscience should tell you that at this time of the year, a leaked exam question paper is not a good idea and will get you into trouble professionally. It means that there is that value system, internalized value system, to determine what is right and wrong. And that is what primarily that we are. We are the conscience of the state. Because very often certain things are not even unlawful, but they may be morally wrong. Right? You may be allowed, for example, to stay in a hotel for a month as a minister while your house is being fixed. The rules may allow it. But is it correct? What does it say about how you govern a country? What does it do to the fiscus or the image of government and so forth? So we are there primarily to be an architect of good governance. Right. So we have a reactive and a proactive mandate. By this we mean, when we say we are reactive, we respond to complaints that come to us. In other words, any one of you here can actually walk into one of our offices and say, the Tshwane University of Technology is refusing to give me my degree. even though I have completed the requirements of the course. This is because I refused to condone corruption somewhere in the university, for example. Because we do, Tswana University of Technology is funded via tax money, so it's one of the organs that we have jurisdiction over. We have jurisdiction over about 1,000 state organs in the country. So then that means we react. That is what we mean by a reactive mandate. A proactive mandate, on the other hand, is what arises out of what we call own initiative investigations. We may see an article in the Sowetan, for example, that says there are grandmothers somewhere in Garankuwa who are not getting their grants, their disability and old age grants, because someone wants a bribe. Then we get in and we investigate out of our own initiative. So we basically are there as an institution that is in pursuit of good governance. And of course, we are also trying to create what is known as the National Integrity Framework for the whole country. So we are what is known as an ombudsman. And an ombudsman was created first in Sweden over 200 years ago, when there was a realization that the people serving the king at the time could not be left to their own whims and devices. In other words, you cannot let people in power do as they please, because they will abuse it. Anybody who's ever heard the term that power corrupts. So even the most honest person, the most well-intentioned person, the moment you give them unlimited and unfettered power, there is a possibility that they may then abuse it. So that is why, for example, when you register at this university, you get to know your rights as a student, and you know where those rights end, the limitations as to what you can and cannot do as a student. The same is true of academic staff. They know their rights as academic staff and so forth, and the limits to which this goes. And we are very similar in our mandate to bodies such as the Auditor General, Public Service Commission, the judiciary, that is the judges, legislature, civil society, and others. And is there anybody who is of vendor-speaking background here? And I'm not going to put you on the spot. It's one of the cultures which I very much. We just came from Thohoyandou recently, and we had a marvelous reception from the people there. There is what is known there as a makazi or makazi. Some people say makazi, some people say makazi. Anybody who know what that is? Just let us. The gentleman in the glasses, apparently they say you are an expert in vendor culture. What is a makazi? It's an aunt. Yes, but any other role that they play within the community? Any idea? Okay, chief advisor to the chiefs and to the community and those in power. She is more the conscience of the community. In other words, she avoids things going out of hand in terms of how the community is run. And we like to see ourselves as the Makazi or Makazi of South Africa. You will see this picture here, if you can go to the first slide, very first slide. The very first slide, unfortunately, the picture is not very good. There is a picture of a lady who is actually from Venda, works for our institution, who is wearing that outfit, the Makazi outfit, as a reflection as a symbolic gesture of the fact that we consider ourselves as the Makazi of South Africa. In other words, that conscience, in the same way that she plays that role within that community, we consider ourselves playing that role. Now, what is our mandate? If you can go to constitutional mandate, we are known as one of the Chapter 9 institutions of South Africa, which means that we are established by Chapter 9 of the Constitution, and we have the power to investigate any conduct in state affairs. And as I've already noted, any state organ falls within our purview. And on our last count, there were over 1,000 state organs, including the Tshwane University of Technology. So any conduct in state affairs or in the public administration, in any sphere of government, that is alleged or suspected to be improper or to result in any impropriety or prejudice, right? So simply put, if there's something that looks fishy in government, or where government resources are involved, taxpayers' money has been involved. Sometimes we've had a state organ that has said, no, but you guys are not, because of our shareholding. I think it was Telkom, because when they decided to go private and list on the stock exchange, there was a debate now. Do we have authority over you? And I think our view really is that as long as your money as taxpayers is involved, we have a say. Of course, it's a very wide interpretation of how we perceive our mandate to be, but I think we're there to protect you and your gains, in other words, the democratic gains. Then we also have an obligation to report on that conduct and to take appropriate remedial action. So, as I've noted, all organs of state that are national, provincial, and local levels, that is municipalities, your statutory bodies and public institutions are included. We don't have a mandate over court decisions, and we have a duty to be accessible in terms of the Constitution to all persons and communities. Hence, you see us doing stakeholder dialogues nationally all over the country. We also have additional mandates, and this is where some of what you are studying may come handy. First and foremost, we have a mandate in terms of maladministration and dispute resolution and so forth, in terms of the Public Protector Act. So we can investigate any sort of impropriety without a complaint and redress public wrongs. That's within our core mandate. Now, you will have noticed yesterday there was a very important announcement made by the Minister of Finance regarding ministers. What was that announcement? Anybody willing to take a bite? The cars, credit cards, hotel bills, and so forth. Oh, there's a roving mic, I see, yeah. Yeah, I think in future we may have to use that. Or maybe you can give her. Maybe you can give her that mic.
The minister said the government is planning to cut its expenditure, so it's gonna cut hotel, or the ministers that are planning, like.
You're on the right spot. You're quite correct.
Even on the functions that the government are doing, it's going like they want to cut expenditure, so there won't be alcohol in the government events anymore.
Yeah, did people hear that? Those who like going to government events. Yeah, no more. Yeah. So now, why I'm raising is that because we are the body, the only body actually, other than perhaps the police and NPA, who are entrusted with the mandate to enforce executive ethics in terms of what is known as the Executive Members Ethics Act of 1998 and of course the Executive Ethics Code. So what the lady has referred to are the rules, the do's and don'ts for especially government ministers, MECs, mayors, and so forth. They all have to declare what their interests are. They cannot abuse taxpayers' funds, and so forth. And we are the custodians of that role, right? So, for example, they have to declare within, I think, 30 or 60 days upon taking office and so forth. If they don't, we come into the picture and we investigate. So that's one of so what the lady has just alluded to, implementation is going to have to be monitored by us as an institution in terms of our mandate. We've also got an anti-corruption mandate as conferred by the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act. We share this with the Auditor General. In other words, so we have an anti-corruption mandate. We have a whistleblower protection mandate in terms of the Protected Disclosures Act of 2000. Now, what this means is that when you are a whistleblower, right, let's say you say, hey, that cleaning contract at TUT, the uncle of the brother of the vice chancellor is the one who's getting those contracts, right? What it means is that when you come to us, let's say if it's a staff member who is giving us that information, that is what is now known as a protected disclosure. And you cannot have occupational detriment as a result of that disclosure. You cannot be fired for it, for example. We're actually dealing with a matter where someone was fired for making such a disclosure. It means that you cannot be fired in terms of the law. And that's where we have a very specific mandate that protects you. And we are the custodians of that, along with the Auditor General. So you come to the Auditor General with such information, you come to us with such information, we are there we are able to protect you. Of course, we recognize there are weaknesses in that legislation. It doesn't protect whistleblowers from civil and criminal liability and so many other things. And certainly, it does not protect them from assassin's bullets. We have seen the unfortunate event where Mr. Lawrence Moepi, who was working with our office on a number of investigations, was shot and killed last Friday. So those are the difficult challenges, obviously, of some of the work. And I suspect a number of you will work in supply chain and forensics when you leave here. And then, of course, the regulation of information under the Promotion of Access to Information Act, what is known as PIA. And, of course, there's all sorts of other jurisdictional mandates that we have. Now, how do we operate? How do we do what we do? As I said, we have a mandate to investigate and report on improper conduct, or improprieties in state affairs. In Guni languages, they say, "Makune sandla semfene." What does that mean? Translate. It basically means where there's a baboon's hand, or suspected baboon's hand, we get in. That's loosely translated. It's a it's a Nguni saying. I don't know how Sotho equivalent would be or Tswana equivalent would be, but we get in where there's suspected impropriety. And then, so what happens is we try and correct transgressions by organs of state, and of course, we do a proper diagnosis, and of course, we try and see that proper redress is provided. Now, we take a three-pronged approach. We ask, when someone comes into our offices, we ask them, what happened for you to be here to lodging a complaint? And then they'll say, I was told that if I do not pay a bribe for this tender, I will not get it, or I'm going to be kicked out. And then we ask, what should have happened? And then we'll say, there must have been a properly constituted supply chain process, and a bid committee must have adjudicated on the bid, but clearly it didn't happen. So then the third leg is there a discrepancy that constitutes maladministration, right? So we'll then call the municipality or state organ in question, and we'll ask them the questions. What happened? What should have happened? And what is the difference between the two? And do they constitute a discrepancy that constitutes maladministration? Maybe the municipality or TUT might say, no, this person is they're just bitter that they didn't get this tender. Their company was not up to scratch. Sometimes we get whistleblowers, people who are whistleblowers, but they turn out that they are very frustrated individuals who are maybe on the verge of being dismissed. Then they turn whistleblower. So it's a very delicate balancing act. We don't assume things. We do proper research, we do proper investigations, because very often, it's a two-way street. Now, we have a very high caseload. We have 4 branches within our entity. The first one being the intake and assessment, which actually assesses the cases and complaints and decides that this is what we are going to accept or not accept. Then we have what is known as early resolution branch, which tries and resolves cases. Our aim is 6 months. So a lot of these matters that are emergency room matters, your ID documents, immigration permits, your pension complaints, you name them, we do them in terms of early resolution. We've also got what is known as a service delivery branch, which deals with some of the issues on service delivery, your RDP, housing complaints, sanitation, you name it, people who are complaining that the government is not delivering, or other entity that has a mandate, municipalities especially. And then we have what is known as good governance and integrity, which really does some of the hotter investigations on alleged corruption, on things that have not been done according to the rules. And Mr. Muepi was working with that particular unit to resolve some very unsavory matters. And so we have a very high caseload which we are battling to actually keep up with and finalize on time. So now, to make this relevant to what a lot of you are studying in terms of supply chain management and expenditure management, we distinguish between 2 main categories of improper conduct. The first is what we call service failure. Second is what we call conduct failure, which are known as integrity violations. So conduct failure in respect of supply chain and financial management, and this is what a lot of you are studying, would typically involve allegations of bribery, fraud, abuse of power, conflict of interest, corruption, nepotism, favoritism, and so forth. And of course, you will get a copy of this presentation and you'll see some of the AG, Auditor General statistics in regard to tender and procurement related matters and how we use those. So now, let's take, for example, some examples of things that we have encountered that have resulted in full investigations and how we have reported on them and the impact that they have resulted in. First example, very famous one that you may have seen in the paper recently, is that our report known as Inappropriate Moves, which was an investigation into the IEC lease. I'm sure you've seen that in the newspapers. People have seen that. Where we investigated allegations that were made by the leader of the UDM, Mr. Bantu Bonke Holomisa, where he said that there had been suspected irregularities in the procurement of Riverside Office Park, and also that the validity of lease agreements that were entered into by the Commission and payments made to a company known as Abland, and of course, the big one that all of you know that has been in the newspapers, the alleged conflict of interest between Advocate Pansi Tlagula and Parliament's Finance Committee Chair, Mr. Thaba Mufamadi. And of course, the finding there was that the acquisition of Riverside Office Park building had been grossly irregular, and there have been violations of legislation, violations of the PFMA, and of course the Commission's own procurement policies. And then of course our finding was that Ms. Tlagula's behavior in the procurement process had been irregular and constituted maladministration. And we directed that the Speaker should take the matter forward. So that's very much a supply chain issue, you know, supply chain gone wrong, tenders gone wrong, you know, because very often these days people have this perception that tenders are the way to wealth. Doesn't matter whether you provide value to society, you know, someone will say, you see someone graduating, you know, with a good degree, and next thing they don't want a job, they just want tenders. You know, whether they want to go and supply toilet paper or catering and so forth, you know, it's immaterial. They basically want tenders. And I think that's part of where South Africa's, the biggest threat in our view is the tender process. In other words, abuse of the tender process. And my apologies. My apologies for that. I think someone is trying to get hold of me. People are always trying to get hold of us, even at 2 a.m. So now the issue really becomes, how do we get to resolve that in terms of the laws of the country? And of course, we are the entry point where someone has a problem with tender processes and abuse of state power. We are the entry point who can actually investigate. We cannot prosecute. At the end of it, we'll either hand it over to the Speaker, we'll hand it over to the NPA and say, look, if there's evidence of criminality, we will say, here is what you need to do, and so forth. Sometimes, very often, and I think state organs fear us, and it's unjustified fear, because we are really there to help government function better. So sometimes we actually just advise them, say, no, look, you shouldn't have done this. We prefer that, this is how you should do it. You should have used these particular processes going ahead. And everybody goes home happy, and there's a lot of good things that happen as a result. And then there is, the next example is what our intervention at Dipaliseng. So this is an example of what our service delivery branch would do. And so we had, here there were public protests and so forth, and it was a situation where there was service delivery due to poor governance and integrity failures. And, normally when people start burning tires and so forth, they will tell you that, municipal manager so and so or his friends are not procuring goods according to the rules. There is improper conduct by municipal officials. There is corruption and theft and so forth. And then that's where we come in. And our intervention basically is that we address the whole range of issues such as lack of housing, poor workmanship. For example, very often we'll get people saying our RDP houses are leaking or they are cracking after 3-4 months and so forth. So then we investigate and check compliance with legislation and of course possibly criminal conduct, and we hand it over and so forth. And the other big one that you may know that deals with supply chain is the one that people associate with the former police commissioner, Mr. Begicele. That is the SAPS lease. Now, in terms of this particular investigation, we found that the procurement process that led to the conclusion of a lease agreement was flawed in various respects. Non-compliance with prescribed procurement procedures that were imposed by the Special National Bid Adjudication Committee and the accounting officer. And there was blatant disregard by the Department of Public Works of the investigation, which was proceeding to sign the lease contract during the process. And of course, there was a lot of improper behavior in relation to the leasing of SAPS accommodation in Durban, which was found to be improper, unlawful, and amounted to maladministration. And they failed to follow tender processes as prescribed by law and what are known as treasury regulations. And in other words, the state failed to get value for money. And basically, several players there within the Department of Public Works, including the minister herself, who the president subsequently released from her job, and the police commissioner, were found to have acted improperly. People tend to feel that this is what we do. We try and get people to. Most of our reports are just advisory. They don't say people should be fired or released from their jobs. They really point out where mistakes have been made, and of course, the executive then will do what is proper in the circumstances. Another example was the misappropriation of public funds for political purposes in the Free State, what is known as funding fiasco in the Free State. And here we saw the awarding of a grant by a municipality to political parties for the purposes of electioneering just prior to the previous elections in 2009. And it was found that such a grant was unconstitutional, unlawful, and therefore invalid. So there was obviously someone who may not have studied at Tshwane University of Technology, who may not have done the right courses that would have told him that, no, this is wrong in terms of the law. You may not, no matter how much you want to please your political boss, no matter how much you want to say, you are a comrade or cadre or something, there are certain things that start becoming a liability even to the people you want to impress. So, and then the remedial action was that the grant had to be recovered by the municipality for political parties involved. Very recent, we also had another one, and I'd ask people to get hold of it. I will leave a copy of it for the faculty to put on the reading list. It's prescribed reading now. It's now added. I've added some new material to the course. A report on Ehlanzeni municipality. We have it here. We will leave it for you to read. It's one of those classic examples where there was blatant disregard of rules and regulations and taxpayers' money just for people's enjoyment. And this is how not to do things when you are in the jobs that you want to do when you leave here. A delegation travels to Italy on an official trip from Ehlanzeni municipality, and they decide when they get there that they don't like Italian food. So what do? They call the CFO back home, send money. I don't remember the exact figure, but I think it was close to $1 million or so. And that money was sent, and then they spent. They had catering. They had money, they had food, they had everything. And then they spend this money, and then it turns out that when they're coming back, there was 120,000 rand or so left of that money. And what do they decide to do? That they will share that 120,000 among 3 or 4 lucky individuals. And end of story, right? This is taxpayers' money. There's a CFO, there's a supply chain manager, there's all sorts of people involved in this whole thing. And I said it's a textbook example for me of how not to do business as someone who is in the public sector. We'll leave a copy of that report for you. It's just one of those things that when you read it, you get shocked at some of the things that people do in the name of the state. And unfortunately, being a whistleblower is not a very fashionable exercise lately, because some of them have, paid with their lives. There's Mr. Pakowe in the Northwest, who was a councillor. Lately, as I said, Mr. Moepi, and very interesting other examples in Malunga, I think Mr. Jimmy Mohlahla, and a few others who unfortunately paid with their lives for believing in good governance. Which leads me to the question, what is governance? And governance is really the manner in which power is exercised in the management of a country's economic and social resources for development. That's the World Bank definition. The United Nations says it's the exercise of economic, political, and administrative authority to manage a country's affairs at all levels, equitable rule of law with consensus. So now for us, what then is your role in good governance, in ensuring that this country never falls into the trap of many countries around the world which started off well with good intentions and then fell apart? What are the consequences of corruption and maladministration in the public sector? When you do your job wrong, what happens? Firstly, there is lost revenue and high expenditure as a result of corruption regarding tax and customs levies, licensing fees, traffic fines, fronting, and so forth. There is a reduction in productive investment and growth. And widespread corruption basically provides a poor environment for foreign direct investment. So people don't bring their money to South Africa or any other country where they feel that the money may not reach the people to whom it is intended. There is a West African country which I may not mention. Remember, the president got into trouble about 2 days ago about mentioning countries by name. Now, a country where people talk about a facilitation fee when you are doing business with the state. An official will ask for a facilitation fee. In other words, that's what a bribe is called. He will facilitate, and it's normal that people expect that. We should not reach that stage where we are. And by the way, this thing is widespread worldwide. Even Western countries cannot tell us that they are better off. There are a lot of corrupt, major corporates, corrupt arms deal companies that sit in very big capitals in Berlin and France and so forth. So it's not really only an African problem. It's international. And there are very great costs to the public and the poor because you divert resources from their intended purposes. In Polokwane, there's a place that they call, anybody here from Polokwane? Maybe, I'm not saying you're one of the residents. There's a place they call Tender Park, where houses have been built from tenders, There are all these overnight millionaires, people who are living very lavishly after getting all this. But that money was meant for the poor. Right in Polokwane itself, there's a place which really broke our hearts recently called Disteneng. You are aware of that place? Right. It's absolute poverty. We went there recently and found a place where 2 children had burned to death because their mother had left them, presumably because she has to work and maybe no one can look after them. And they were trying to keep warm during the winter. And they burned to death. And not far away, close by, a stone's throw away, there are these palatial homes, in Tender Park, which belong to people who have not much to show for what they have done for the state, but nonetheless live well. So those funds ordinarily would help in building what is a more equitable society. So what does this result in? It results in loss of confidence in public institutions, erodes stability and trust, and it damages the ethos of democratic government. Just 1 second. I will give you an analogy of how much the expenditure when you waste funds. I will give it to you shortly. But then now, what are the consequences of corruption in public procurement? Right? Firstly, you have a situation where public revenue is diverted. There is no proportionate return in terms of goods and services, no benefit to society, and enforcement and remedy then require additional funding. The former Minister of Human Settlements, Mr. Tokyo Sehwale, mentioned that there's about 3 billion rand needed to fix homes that have been built that are not of a right standard. Now, for you, there is a snapshot of areas that are identified by the Auditor General in adverse findings that are often made. And in terms of all supply chain management, currently, 76% of local government entities, municipalities, have adverse findings. And I believe quite a few of you are going to be studying that. And I hope there are no graduates of TUT who are responsible for that. The quality of performance reports, 79% has adverse findings. In terms of human resource management, 53% has adverse findings. The quality of submitted financial statements, there is 88%. In terms of financial health, things are much better there. That, there are going concerns, 83%. And both the SIU and the Auditor General recently found that in the 2010-2011 financial year, 26 billion rand of taxpayers' money was wasted. Now, let me tell you what 26 billion rand can do for South Africa. It can employ 411,000 state teachers, 332,000 state doctors, 413,000 state nurses, over a billion maintenance workers, and 231 police officers combined. Right, that's what 26 billion can do. In terms of basic services, it can build over 4.3 million toilets. It can provide over 8.2 million HIV treatments. It can electrify 4.7 million homes, right? And it can feed over 6.1 million children, combined, inclusive. So this is what happens when graduates of TUT graduate, get into departments, and don't do their work properly. You steal from the people of South Africa. In the process, you destroy the country. When you drive and you see a pothole and you complain, hey, I'm a pothole, it's you are part of the problem. You are the problem. So that's basically when there's this different ethos that people need to have when they go to work every morning. It's not about just earning a salary. It's about making a difference. It's really about making a difference, because this is what happens when you think about yourself. Because, most of us, 60 years from now, will not be here. I hate to remind you about the subject of death, People don't like talking about death, But the reality is there will be other people that you have left here that will have to take over. And this is what we try to avoid. Now, in terms of our sister organization, they blame a lot of their bad audit findings on three key issues. Firstly, unauthorized expenditure. Secondly, irregular expenditure, which went to about 10 billion. Fruitless and wasteful expenditure, which went to 260 million. And they say that more than 70% of officials in key positions do not have the minimum competencies and skills required to perform their jobs. They also say that at least 73% of the people they audit shows general signs of lack of consequences for poor performance. So in other words, when you don't perform, nothing happens to you. Some people are suspended on full pay. Very often the case. So one of the observations at our Good Governance Conference was that many of this continues because people don't really see consequences for bad behavior. And of course, what has also been identified are things such as lack of controls, mismanagement, lack of governance principles, and other people get to know how to override internal controls. They also get to know about collusion between employees and third parties. So the private sector is also a very big player. As the Minister of Justice, Mr. Jeff Hadebe, said the other day, it takes two to tango. So the private sector is also involved in corrupting people in the public sector, because they are the ones who offer the bribes. They get the tender, and then they give a cut, as it were. So now, how to deal with it in terms of what we are doing? We've got a very comprehensive and practical legislative framework which gives a very good basis for us combating corruption in the public sector, because I know most of you are public sector finance professionals. So, and we have quite a lot of legislation and directives, including the Constitution, the Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act, Promotion of Access to Information Act, Protected Disclosures Act, and all these do wonderful things. They criminalize corruption, protect whistleblowers, provide access to information, and so forth and so forth. And of course, there's international cooperation in criminal matters. So it's not that the laws are terrible. It's the mindset, which is what I'm trying to actually inculcate in people, to say, look, you need to change the mind from self to us. And of course, the state is committing significant resources to fight corruption. And these are potential employers that I've listed here: the Special Investigations Unit, the Asset Forfeiture Unit, or there was the Scorpions, it doesn't exist, Specialized Commercial Crimes Unit, Auditor General, Public Protector, that is ourselves, Public Service Commission, and so forth. And of course, there are anti-corruption strategies that are in place, of which we are a very key component. And this was, in terms of the public service anti-corruption strategy, this was adopted by Cabinet in 2002, and it has 9 strategic considerations, which include increased institutional capacity, improving reporting on wrongdoing, and protecting whistleblowers. There's also one at local government level, which focuses on the organization. How do you implement codes of conduct effectively? Systems policies, putting sound internal controls, and also focusing on employees, vetting. Very often, sometimes, you've seen the embarrassing situation where the SAPS, the people who are supposed to know better, they are the ones with senior individuals, for lack of a better word, with Fong Kong qualifications, fake qualification, where we are struggling. Then, of course, reporting and monitoring allegations of unethical conduct, fraud, and corruption. That's where you obviously have to come in, because whistleblowing and so forth. And then how do you implement that going ahead in terms of ongoing maintenance and review? Some countries, such as the United States, where I lived for quite a while, have bounty provisions, rewards. I'm sure you've seen that in old films, where they say a reward of 100,000 is going to be given. I'm sure you saw the Diepsloot accused. When they put 100,000, the accused was caught within a few hours. Yeah? I'm sure, did people see that? They said, we want 100,000 rand reward for someone who leads us to this person. Within a few hours, they were caught. So it might actually, maybe we might need to use those kind of incentives as well here to say, look, there is an incentive for people to report corruption financially. We'll actually gain a lot than, 100,000 to catch someone who has stolen 30 million. You see, is actually, I think, a very good deal. And of course, we also need a societal approach, as I've noted. The National Planning Commission has said corruption is a societal ill and requires the commitment of all members of society. The moment people understand that bribing is wrong and feel that way, will go a long way. How many people here know someone who's paid for their driver's license? I'm not saying who paid for their driver's license. Huh? Just say, raise your hand. Someone who knows someone who paid for their driver's license. Please be honest. You see, it's almost as if there's now currently a going rate for people who, when I was a lecturer, a student of mine said to me that she went and tried to pay for her driver's license, but she was not ready. So what happened was when you are doing the polls thing, she reversed so hard, she hit the pole and it flew, but she had already paid her bribe. And unfortunately for her, there were traffic officers who were watching. So even the person who had been bribed said, no, this goes beyond, you really are not a fit and proper driver. But she never got her money back, unfortunately. So, those are sort of things, it starts small with things like that, driver's licenses, roadworthy tests, you name it, places for children in schools. It becomes a societal disease. And then, of course, there's the famous one, the cold drink, when you are stopped on the road. See, the moment we pay for those cold drinks, the police, when they says, my cold drink, he says it's hot outside. So those are the things that are really costing us, where it comes within for you as individuals. And of course, we've seen that it's not just the public sector. We saw the Competition Commission just fined construction companies over 1.46 billion rand for collusion. You remember a few years ago, some of you may have still been in school, the bread companies were also charged with collusion in fixing prices. So we really need to have that situation where we encourage whistleblowing without fear of harm and without you being involved. And this is where most of you, why this is relevant to you, because most of you are going to be doing this in your professional capacity. It then becomes more effective. And of course, the focus areas then for public and private sectors to address fraud and corruption would be training of management and staff. And I think that you are getting great training here at Tshwane University of Technology. And then, of course, what you then need to study are the risk management and fraud policies, promotion of ethical conduct and good business, understanding whistleblower policies, and the kind of organizational culture that is needed to fight corruption. So We talk about all these wonderful things, constitutional dreams, gender inequality, non-racial society, non-sexist society, but as long as these efforts are impeded by corruption, we are likely to fail. And so there's a very shared responsibility in terms of how to implement this. And that's where, as I said, you come in. Now, just for those who want to know how do you initiate a case or complaint with us, there is a number there, a toll-free number, 0800 11 20 and 40. So we're not going to do anything to your airtime. Airtime is precious. It's toll-free. Just call that number if you have a problem. And then, of course, you can walk into one of our 20 offices around the country, 9 provincial offices, 1 national office, and 10 regional offices. And, of course, we have outreach activities, mobile offices, clinics. We go out to the community. And we're also on our website, there are forms, publicprotector.org, or you can send an email to registration@pprotect.org. And that way you can help us help you. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen.